Just going to jump in here. Hey, so today it's noon, and I'm going to be going over uh, each of the elements of my SEL framework. There are 8 elements, and social emotional learning is kind of a big deal right now in schools, especially. And so I thought I would just take some time and look through this SEL framework I created a few years ago, and I've been working on ever since. And so I thought I would just invite people out to check out the SEL framework, just one element at a time. And what better way than to use this virtual space I've created for just such occasions. So with that, anybody that does find the event link and does join this space to talk about this with me, this is where you're going to start if this is your first time in the space. So just so you know, you can come on up here and enter this doorway, and it'll take you into the space with the classrooms and everything you need. You can feel free before you do so. Feel free to come around and click on stuff and play around with stuff. Watch a video, interact with this whiteboard here, and you use the letter X. You tap X to interact with it. All right, let's hop in. Okay, so we're gonna head up to the classrooms this way, and we're gonna look for, here it is, the social emotional learning classroom. Let's hop in. Okay, you hop in, you enter the classroom, and there's a portal to the office right here that if you step on that portal right there, then it'll take you to my office. We're not going to do that. If you click X and engage in this information board, it'll show you the 8 elements of this SEL framework. So we're going to be looking at the first element, the self-awareness and management element regarding how we cope with emotions differently than feelings. So let's walk over to that first element up here, and there's a little number 1 right here on the carpet here. So anywhere on the table, if you press X, you'll be able to interact with this interactive whiteboard for this topic. So you click on this, and this whiteboard, as many people can, there's no limit on how many people can interact with this whiteboard at one time. So feel free to, when you come in, bring a few people with you and mess around with the board. Don't mess with it, but interact with it in responsible ways that are helpful to anyone else who comes onto the board. So we're going to be looking at identifying strengths and needs with regards to the self. Specifically, we're going to be looking at this question: how do we cope with emotions differently than with feelings? And that's under the What I Know column here on this whiteboard. And as I go through this first column of what I know, you can actually leave a post-it over here on the left, and you can pose questions as to what you want to know in this column by just coming in there, zooming in, and typing in your question. And you can resize this post-it to make it larger. You can even move it so that it's a wider post-it. So there's a lot you can do here. And from the information here, and from what people want to know, you can leave messages and post-its where any conclusions or any ahas you make, you can form them in a way that prompts more discussions. You can leave questions you still have and offer resources to share with others. So there's a lot to do here. But let's just take a quick look at this first column, what I know. So right off the bat, what is important to distinguish here is that a feeling is different than emotion. And so what I'm going to add here, I'm going to add something on this post-it. I'm going to say that a feeling is essentially, it is the input of stimulus, right? So whenever you feel a breeze across your face, that's a feeling. You're feeling that. When somebody speaks to you, if they say something nice, that's a good feeling. That's something that's coming in. If somebody yells at you angrily, that's a different kind of feeling, right? And so a feeling is input, right? A feeling is receiving stimuli, right? There we go. So a feeling is, let's see, if I were to say, I feel happy, I feel sad, I feel like frustrated, I feel, there's lots of, I'll just put that, there's lots of different feelings we have based on our experiences as we experience them. And so what's the distinction I want to make here is that the feeling is different than the emotion. The emotion is the actual physical representation of what it is that you're feeling. So someone might be angry with you and yell at you, and you might automatically want to respond in kind with anger and frustration. But that anger as an emotion that you express can be crafted. It can be changed. It can be something where you don't actually have to respond with anger. The emotion is something that you can measure and adapt as needed. You can control the emotion to some extent, where the feeling is really just, what are you feeling in the moment? And even though you might feel frustrated with what it is that you're seeing or hearing, your emotional response doesn't have to necessarily be anger, right? So that's where we start to see the distinction of a feeling and emotion. So that, I think, is really important. Now, when you think about an emotion, you think of, joy. And if you've ever seen the Disney Pixar film Inside Out, you might be familiar with these particular emotions. Anger, it's a good one. Fear, it's a very popular one. Sadness, can't forget that one. And disgust, okay. A lot of people argue that disgust might not be one, that there are others like surprise. Somebody might say that surprise is an emotion, but I'm going to stick with these 5. In fact, this is an image in my book that I put describing how these emotions are the core 5 emotions that we might present to somebody in their purest form, and that this other image reflects what happens when we might feel anger and disgust at the same time. If you're angry at somebody, but you're also equally disgusted for some reason, contempt is one possible product of those 2 emotions being expressed at the same time. You have contempt for somebody. You're disgusted in a very angry way. And so compound emotions is something that you develop over time as you get more complex in your experiences, and you feel different things. You feel multiple things at the same time. And so compound emotions are things that you might feel, that you might express. Where if you know that that's the compound, correlation, the compound response to the situation, because it's a little more complex, then once you can name that emotion, or at least give it some sort of recognition and acknowledgement, then you can work on figuring out how to tame that particular compound emotion or complex theme. So down here, what I have are what I call stages. And, I don't like numbering them, but they're essentially 10 stages that show a logical development of awareness and management, where what we just did right now was basically identifying simple emotions as physical reactions. So your awareness of that is basically the first step. Like, you start with you start with this. If you want to say that there are 8 emotions, great. If you want to say there's 5, 4, 6, but you start with that basis, right? And so from there, you can develop an awareness of ranges of these emotions, where joy might be just simple contentedness, or you might be amused or excited, but those are different levels of joy. Sadness, you might just be bored, which arguably is a construct that doesn't exist in a lot of cultures, so bored is not really the best example, I'll admit. But then disappointed is just a slight bit of sadness, right? It's maybe could be more or less convenience involved, but distraught is definitely a more severe version of sadness to think about. So then from there, you can look at and consider extended ranges beyond distraught, where you might feel helpless, misery and despair and anguish. Those are not as common. But once you identify that there are those ranges and you recognize that those ranges are not actually as common, but they can happen, then you can prepare in advance that if that ever does happen, you know that it exists and you know that there are coping strategies for them. But they're not something that you obsess over every day until it's something that you have to deal with, right? And so that's where awareness breeds capacity for management, self-management. From there, you look at compound emotions and you can start talking about stress factors. And so there's a logical development of this awareness for self-management of feelings and emotions. And it goes even more complex and more complex until you are dealing with connotations of emotions and identifying impacts of different emotional responses on others in the context of more complex global situations. So you're starting to look at the impact that things that are happening outside of your immediate environment are having on you and how that might be affecting others. And so you can see how these stages, they develop, they evolve, and from there you can identify, based on how old somebody is in a kindergarten classroom, middle school classroom, or high school classroom. You're not just going to start a high school student at stage 7. You might need to start at stage 1. Identify and start with a basis of core, simple emotions, and from there build. If they're a little bit older, if they're in high school, they might actually get through these stages a little quicker until you get to stage 7, stage 8, and then it might become more difficult and it might take more time. And so this is where you get into personalizing this kind of social and emotional learning in schools. So with just that brief 15-minute explanation, because I'm basically here on my own today, I'm going to stop there. And if you want to jump in here at any time, there's a link to visit this virtual space, visit this board, leave any thoughts and post-its of what you want to know, what you learned, questions you still have, any resources you think might be helpful. That way this becomes a source for people to talk about this first element of my SEL framework for social and emotional learning. All right, well, with that, I'm going to end the feed, and I'll see you